His body convulsed with the first cut. He almost tore himself away from me. The sound he made. I had never heard such sounds come from anything human. Tagatoi seemed to pay no attention as she lengthened and deepened the cut, and now and then pausing to lick away blood. His vessels contracted, reacting to the chemistry of her saliva, and the bleeding slowed. I felt as though I were helping her torture him, helping her consume him. I knew I would vomit soon. Didn't know why I hadn't already. I couldn't possibly last until she was finished. She found the first grub. It was fat and deep red with his blood, both inside and out. It had already eaten its own egg case, but apparently had not yet begun to eat its host. At this stage, it would eat any flesh except its mother's. The short story Bloodchild by Octavia Butler centers around a young Terran boy named Gon, who lives with his family on a preserve on an alien world overseen by Tagatoi, a member of the alien species known as the Tlic. The humans, or Terrans within the preserve, live peaceful lives and are provided for by the Tlic, but at a grotesque cost. Bloodchild was first published in 1984 in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. It later became the title story of her 1995 collection, Bloodchild and Other Stories. I've already covered Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy in these videos here. Bloodchild was written around the same time and shares some similar themes surrounding the cost humankind might be willing to pay for survival. Keep in mind this video will have spoilers for Bloodchild, so if you care about that sort of thing, you might want to click away from this video. Hi guys, it's Quinn here. If you appreciate my content, consider hitting the like button. It's the best way to get the YouTube algorithm to notice this channel. If you want to do more to support this channel, consider checking out the Patreon link in the description. The story opens with Gon's last night of childhood, as his family enjoys the calming effects of a sterile Tlic egg gifted by Tagatoi. Tagatoi, a powerful government official, has been deeply integrated into the family, having been friends with Gon's mother Lin since childhood, but the relationship is more complex than it seems. Although she appears to be affectionate towards Gon, her role involves more than just friendship. She has claimed one of Lin's children to serve as host for her offspring, Gon himself. It is mentioned in the story that the Tlic would rather implant their eggs within a female, but within the preserve, they would rather allow women to bear their own young instead. A steady supply of humans was needed to provide host for the Tlic. Male humans are primarily used for implantation. This arrangement is seen as a normal part of their everyday existence within the preserve. In the story, the humans within the preserve live long lives, expanded by their consumption of the sterile Tlic eggs. Gon's father had lived a long life by consuming the eggs. Gon's father had been implanted with Tlic eggs 3 separate times over the course of his life. Though Gon's mother has presumably lived her entire life on the preserve, now that the implantation of Gon is looming, some tensions begin to emerge. Early in the story, Lin initially refuses to consume the sterile Tlic egg given to the family by Tagatoi, which signifies her resistance to Tagatoi and her ambivalence towards the Tlic's influence over her family, and throughout the story, Lin watches Gon closely, resenting the imminent implantation but feeling powerless to prevent it. She feels trapped within a system where her children are used by the Tlic in this manner. Tagatoi, for her part, feels responsibility for the safety and well-being of the Terrans, and yet she also uses them to ensure the continuation of her species. This relates to a major theme in the story: the balance between protection and exploitation. It is not clear whether or not there are other human preserves on this world, but what does seem to be clear is that Tagatoi's behavior does not seem to represent the will of the entire Tlic species, many of which seem to view human beings more like an animal resource than a companion species. Tagatoi was hounded on the outside. Her people wanted more of us made available. Only she and her political faction stood between us and the hordes who did not understand why there was a preserve, why any Terran could not be courted, paid, drafted, in some way made available to them. Or they did understand, but in their desperation, did not care. It is implied that some in her species would prefer no Terran preserves at all, in which case humans would likely be hunted by the Tlic in the natural way, or at least human conditions would change to such a degree that the preserves would resemble modern animal factory farming. Tagatoi mentions to Gon that humans fled their homeworld eons ago, seeking safety and freedom from enslavement from their own people. Before those days, the Tlic had used host animals to bear their young. At some point, these animals started killing the Tlic eggs after implantation. When humans came to their world, they saw an opportunity. According to Tagatoi, the Tlic are relearning what it means to be a healthy, thriving people. She frames the relationship between the Tlic and humans as beneficial for both. At some point, a man named Bram Lamis arrives at the family's home, severely ill and in need of Tagatoi's help. He is an Tlic, a human who has been implanted with Tlic eggs, and his condition is rapidly deteriorating as the grubs inside of him are beginning to emerge. Tagatoi takes action and prepares to extract the grubs, a dangerous procedure that Lamas's own Tlic would typically perform. Gon, against Tagatoi's warning, insists on staying to help despite the horrifying nature of the process. Gon is sent to kill a Terran animal called an Acti to feed the grubs once they are removed from Lamas. Upon returning with the slaughtered creature, Gon faces the visceral, grotesque reality of the birthing process as Tagatoi opens Lamas's body and extracts the blood-soaked grubs. This moment is deeply traumatic for Gon, who has been taught all his life to view the relationship between humans and the Tlic as one of mutual benefit, but witnessing the painful extraction of the grubs forces him to confront the darker side of that relationship. Paler worms oozed to visibility in Lamas's flesh. I closed my eyes. It was worse than finding something dead, rotting, and filled with tiny animal grubs. It was far worse than any drawing or diagram. Ah, there are more, Tagatoi said, plucking out 2 long, thick grubs. You may have to kill another animal, Gon. Everything lives inside you Terrans. I had been told all my life that this was a good and necessary thing Tlic and Terran did together. A kind of birth. I had believed it until now. I knew birth was painful and bloody no matter what. But this was something else. Something worse. I wasn't ready to see it. Maybe I never would be. Yet, I couldn't not see it. Closing my eyes didn't help. Gon is overcome with fear and disgust, so he leaves the house vomiting and crying. He is conflicted, having grown up so close to Tagatoi, yet now facing the harsh truth of what it means to be an Tlic, a host for the Tlic. His brother Qui, who has already become disillusioned with the Tlic, shares a story of seeing a man eaten alive by grubs, deepening Gon's horror. Qui's bitterness reveals the emotional toil of growing up under the Tlic's dominance, where it can be hard not to recognize that humans are likely seen as little more than breeding vessels by most Tlic. Gon contemplates using his rifle against Tagatoi, either by killing himself or killing her. This moment, I believe, symbolizes his struggle to reclaim control over his body and over his life, rejecting the predetermined path laid out for him. When Tagatoi confronts him, she expresses regret that he had to witness the birthing, insisting that it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Gon essentially demands that she acknowledge the risk and choices involved in their partnership. He refuses to be treated just as an animal tool. But ultimately, in the end, Gon chooses to accept his role as Tagatoi's host, not out of submission necessarily, but as an assertion of agency. He decides that he will carry Tagatoi's eggs, ensuring that she remains in his life, This decision is rooted both in his love for Tagatoi, because there is real love there, although it is strange, alien love, and it is also rooted in his desire to protect his family, as Tagatoi might not be able to protect the family from the ramifications if it should become known that he refused. Also, Tagatoi would have implanted her eggs within his sister if he had refused, so he was also acting out of a desire to protect his sister specifically. Despite the deep discomfort and fear that he feels, Gon accepts the responsibilities of adulthood and the complex intertwined relationship between the Tlic and the Terrans. The story ends with Gon allowing Tagatoi to implant the first egg in him, experiencing a strange, almost intimate act of receiving her offspring. Though painful and disorienting, the act also solidifies the bond between the two of them. Gon has come to terms with his role in this alien world, understanding that while he may not be entirely free, he can still make some choices that matter. Ultimately, he chooses to live, to endure, to maintain the delicate balance between survival and sacrifice that defines his life with Tagatoi. Now, some people have interpreted this story as a metaphor for slavery, but Octavia Butler actually explained that this was not her intention. Instead, she frames Bloodchild as a complex narrative with multiple layers, a love story, a coming-of-age tale, and a pregnant man story. Butler wanted to explore the idea of a man voluntarily choosing pregnancy, not out of competitiveness or coercion or curiosity, but as an act of love, despite the difficulties and risks involved. Butler was also inspired by the botfly, which is a parasitic insect that lays its eggs under the skin of its host. This real-life creature led her to explore the theme of parasitism in Bloodchild as a way of confronting and easing her anxiety. Bloodchild was my first effort to ease an old fear of mine. I was going to travel to the Peruvian Amazon to do research for my Xenogenesis books, and I worried about my possible reactions to some of the insect life in the area. In particular, I worried about the botfly, an insect with what seemed to me then horror movie habits. There was no shortage of botflies in the part of Peru that I intended to visit. The botfly lays its eggs in the wounds left by the bites of other insects. I found the idea of a maggot living and growing under my skin, eating my flesh as it grew, to be so intolerable, so terrifying, I didn't know how I could stand it if it happened to me. The problem was, to do what would seem to be the normal thing, to squeeze out the maggot and throw it away, was to invite infection. The maggot becomes literally attached to its host and leaves a part of itself behind, broken off if it's squeezed or cut out. Of course, the part left behind dies and rots, causing infection. When I have to deal with something that disturbs me as much as the botfly did, I write about it. Writing, she explains, is how she processes and overcomes her fears, whether in response to personal or global events. The botfly's unsettling reproductive process obviously directly influenced the Tlic's method of implanting eggs in humans, which is central to the horror of this story. According to Octavia Butler, Bloodchild is essentially about paying the rent, a metaphor for the difficult accommodations that humans must make in order to survive as an isolated colony on an alien world. She imagines humans in a situation far from reinforcement or support, forced to negotiate a unique relationship with their alien host. This adds another layer of complexity as the story examines what humans might be willing to trade for survival in a space not their own. Contrast this against, say, the culture from Ian Banks's legendary series. Within the culture, humans are able to live essentially utopian lives, taken care of by synthetic intelligences. The cost to them is virtually non-existent. Octavia Butler obviously presents a scenario that is far more disturbing, reflecting a darker side of the real world we live in. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe for more Quinn's ideas.